think we're ready to get started here after that rousing rendition of the TMI pep song. Thank you, Nick, for that. And I'm sure a few more people will join us as we get going, but it's great to have Stephen Byrne with us all the way from the north of England. And so we'll just get started with a few questions for Stephen, especially for those of you that might not have worked with him. I think most of us on the call probably are familiar with Stephen, but we'll just start with a few questions for you, Stephen, as we get into some choir leadership topics today. But where are you right now?
Right now, I'm in my hometown of Bedlington, Northumberland, England.
And so that's where you live. That's where you grew up in the corps as well. And what do you do for work? Well, I mean, that's a sensitive question at these times, I guess. But
Right. Well, right now,
enjoying
I'm on
yourself there.
temporary retirement is what we're going to call it, which it's just easy to get used to. I'm on furlough right now, as is many of the folks in the world, but still employed by the Salvation Army as a bit of a mouthful of a title, Regional Music and Creative Arts Specialist for the North of England. Returned home from the USA South in 2014 and became Divisional Children's Officer. In 2016, there was a reshuffle of the territory in Fit for Mission, and these music roles became available, and it was right up my street. So there was a switch over to the music and arts again, which obviously has been my first love, and it's been interesting getting it up and running in what is a small geographical area, but lots and lots of corps. So I deal with about 115 corps in my one region.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive over there in England with the number of corps that are in the division you guys have to work with, and I guess essentially kind of creating a DMD role in a sense over there, like what you did here. So just give us a quick background. I know you were in the States for a little bit, but where all did you work in the South?
So 1998, the same year, on an almost the same plane as Nick Simmons-Smith, we arrived having graduated university and came to Texas and spent 8 wonderful years in Texas, started as ADMD and then eventually moved to be the Deputy Divisional Music Director there and served in that Texas Music Department team, initially under Jim Anderson and then under my brother, Philip, which was always interesting. I always used to think that maybe I would probably say too much to Philip, but then he would also ask me to do things that he wouldn't ask the others. So maybe it's a balanced stuff. But we had a great team. Lots of DMDs of the future came through that program, and also served on the staff with us. In 2006, the DMD position in Florida became available. And I really felt God's calling to stepping out on my own and that it was the time to do that. So headed across to Florida and had a wonderful 7 years there working in a program and developing my own program, working with those young people, a divisional band that was established. And it was just, again, a real privilege and to be able to work in that ministry. And, there's many times you look back on a chapter and think, oh, maybe that could have been continued. But that was a family calling to head home. And I don't have any regrets of that. I just have tons of fond memories of my times in the USA South, TMI being a big part of that as well. So it's wonderful to be able to kind of come full circle and share with you in this way.
Yeah. Well, just a quick background for you, which is, I think, all we need. But let's get into the choir side of things, which I think is why folks are tuning in just now. And if you have questions, we'll take some questions as we go. We'll take some questions toward the end. So if we don't get to what you were hoping to learn today, Stephen can address that. And also, I think Stephen has a few resources he wants to share along the way. So feel free to stop me, Stephen, if you ever want to pop those in. But as far as choir and your experience growing up, I think a lot of us on this call probably did band as our kind of first and foremost kind of background and maybe our training. So where did choir come into play for you? Was it at the corps? Did you sing in school? And that kind of aspect.
Um, Prior to really university, my choir training essentially had been through the Salvation Army. I come from a singing corps. Now that's kind of a general statement, but as I've returned and as people have visited, it's a corps that loves to sing in harmony, and it's kind of inbuilt where that's just this powerful congregational singing, which is in 4, 5, 15 parts. They just love it, and that was a solid foundation, I think, for me. Essentially, I was a bando. I was a brass player through university, sang in a choir there until I was in the orchestra, and then I didn't have to, and then I didn't. And really, it was when we got to Texas. Initially, it was probably more of a totem pole in Texas when we were there, where Jim would do everything. Again, it was Jim Anderson. Why wouldn't you have Jim do everything? And we would support wherever we could. When Philip took over and the leadership took over, that changed a bit. And then I slotted into leading the Texas Brass Chorus. And that was kind of really my first venture into leading singing. I was always a decent singer. I don't think I was a soloist at that point, but I enjoyed singing. And really, it was that love of singing that I wanted to share, and that was my drive, that I wanted maybe that Ballantine chorus at the Texas Conservatory, who were deemed the second chorus, to be able to enjoy having a sing. And yes, that was stuff that we would learn as we went through that. But it was a love of singing that drew me into the beginning parts of leading choirs.
Yeah, and I can attest to your corps being a singing corps. When your dad comes for a visit to our corps, he sings louder than the whole congregation, and is always the one that hangs on until everyone has stopped so we can hear him. So it's always fun to have your dad with us. Um, yeah, and as far as the choirs go, yeah, we still have Ballantine choir in Texas, but we split the bottom choir into two. So now the boys choir is Anderson, very manly choir, and then Ballantine is the girls chorus. But yeah, so okay, as you took on these roles, were there any choir leaders you had growing up that you kind of wanted to emulate, or where did you kind of get some of your leadership ideas? Or sometimes we probably don't want to mention any names here, but sometimes you have some leaders that you learn what not to do from. But who are some of your influences as leaders in that respect?
That's definitely something, Matt, that as I think about, you think about the people that you've sat under. And I hope our young people, and I hope everybody on this call are watching, folks, because you can learn an awful lot. You learn a lot of what you don't want to do, the stuff that eventually starts like cheesing you off, or the things that they've missed. That you kind of make that mental note. But yes, we should be watching the people who get up in front of us, so we can just pick all those best bits, leave the stuff that we don't like, but take all that we can. It was a faculty chorus at TMI that Lem Ballantine led, and it was in Rehearsal Hall in Texas, the main room. And that was when I think really my kind of fire was lit for choral music. Len just had this ability to bring everybody together, as well as wring everything out of the music. And it was his music, so it was good music. As well as the opportunity to sit in a faculty chorus with great singers. That was when I think the light bulb went on to me, where the detail of singing was brought into clarity. You know, the opportunity for 30 folks to really work as one with this material, and the clarity of that message when it's been polished in the right way and being delivered, and there's an understanding of where it came from. And Len was just superb at that, and that was kind of really the spark for me. So I would watch Len during that week, and it was really formative for me. But the other part of that is we all have our own personalities. We all have um, our own characteristics that come out in our leadership. We have to be true to ourselves. You can't really be somebody else. And we all have our own strengths and our own delivery. So we kind of have to refine that. Yes, you want to take on board what you're kind of soaking in from other folks, but also we have to look to refine kind of what our strengths are.
Yeah, I think that's an important statement there. And even myself, I've been leading the songsters at the core for a number of years now. But when you first take on leadership, you do think about the good leaders that you've been in front of or under the leadership of. But you also have like that comparison factor, and like, am I acting like this person? I think at the end of the day, you have to be yourself. And so I couldn't be Stephen Byrne, I couldn't be Daniel Meeks and these other songster leaders that I've sat under, but I have to kind of take the good parts of what they've shown you, but then put your own personality and your own spin into it. And so it can be kind of um, daunting at first. So let me ask you a question in that respect. You know, when did you feel comfortable in front of a choir? I'm sure when you first took over the Ballantine Choir in Texas or the youth choir, like it was a bit strange, having because I think there's something about leading the choir that's a bit more relational than the band. The band has that barrier. You got the baton, and they have their instruments, and so it's not, there's a bit of a barrier between you. But the choir, it's just you and them, and your bad breath and everything else between the two of you. So when did you first feel like you could do it?
You know me, Matt. I'm very shy, very demure. I think for the longest time, maybe it's just a bit of personality and bravado would get me through without really having a good understanding of some of the fundamentals of what a good choir would be. And I think it was purely that love of singing that was the drive. I think it took for me to have the songsters in Dallas, where on a weekly basis then I was building relationships, like you said. It was wonderful to have the divisional responsibilities. But again, that's so sporadic. When you have that weekly choir and you get to know that group and you get to know their strengths, and in probably a core group, you get to know the areas where they're not so strong. That was when that I was becoming more comfortable. And I also hit a point where I realized if I want to do this in a more serious way, and if I want to do this justice, and if I have a love for this, then I have to dig a little bit deeper and I have to learn some more. And some of that is maybe taking a pride out of things and going to speak to maybe great vocalists who can give you some pointers. Again, I haven't really had a singing lesson, which I would take that on. But having that opportunity to maybe have a singing lesson or to speak to somebody who is a trained singer who's been in my choir, who could say, well, you know what, you really kind of like hurt us there in the top register for too long, and you need to not do that, and be open for the right folks to be able to guide you. But I definitely think it was having a regular core brigade that, then looking at repertoire again at that point, in a divisional sense, working maybe towards youth chorus, you've got lots of time to prepare repertoire. Whilst kind of the week-to-week grind of a songster brigade, I was always conscious that I didn't want anybody to be bored, and I would be awful if I was bored, and it would reflect on my leadership. So the repertoire had to be turning over. Yes, you have your standards that you can pop back to as you need to, but then being deliberate in how we do that, and then also being consistent. And this is some of the stuff we'll talk about maybe when we get into some specifics. Is that we have to be consistent. I want the brigade to know, the choir to know that when they come to a rehearsal, this is what it's going to look like, and it's going to be prepared, and we're going to be ready.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned, I think, is good for all of us as leaders to kind of take in is that you don't always have all the answers, and especially in choir. I think, like I said, many of us were trained in band, and we even went to college for that. But I had one semester of vocal pedagogy vocal technique at school, and that was it. And so, it'd be like me trying to teach violins at this point in my life. But yeah, so, leaning on people, of course we have B. Holtz, Dr. B. Holtz in the Salvation Army, who's an expert. But I remember you at TMI for several years. I believe her name was Elizabeth, but I could be wrong. But not having the ego or the pride to say I know it all, but actually letting someone else come in front of your group, um, and actually work on some of the things that you don't know about, and that's one of the things for me, like proper pronunciation of the vowels when it comes. There's always a word or two that I don't know the answer to that. Let's sing it this way this week, and I'll get back to you next week after I talk to somebody that
Right.
knows a bit more than me. But yeah, I think that's a good idea for us as leaders to have people that, we're not the end all, but here's some other people that we know that can point us in the right direction as well.
Goodness me, does that not reflect being a Christian as well, Matt? That way we are not going to have the answers. And as spiritual leaders, which is kind of what I've been thinking about over the last maybe 2 years as we've been working on some material here, we are spiritual leaders in these different roles. And it goes beyond maybe it's just the nuts and bolts of the music. You talked about how we have to be relational within our choirs, and you're right. We don't have the barriers of the stand and the instruments and that sort of stuff. We have to be communicating, and you have to know your group to do that. But it goes beyond just knowing a group as if it was on a professional level. It goes on to knowing your group in a spiritual level, so that we can kind of really emphasize and amplify the message that we have.
Let me ask you a couple questions, and then I think we'll get into some more of the practical application side, and you might have a couple resources you want to share with us too. But you talked about some of the different groups you've led at the divisional level. Of course, yeah, it's you got once a month, if that, and so that's a whole different ball game. The core, which is great every week, being able to work on songs, and then of course you led the Southern Territorial songsters, a more elite group that can learn things quicker. What were the differences maybe in those three different applications where you've been able to lead? Differences as a leader that you take with those three different types of groups, preparation, maybe even in repertoire selection. How would you describe those?
So the first thing that jumped to mind there was the repertoire maybe that led between those three different groups. Yeah. I'll start with the Territorial Songsters. That was a smaller group. When I took over, it was a group of 16. And they hadn't been singing a lot of Salvation Army music, so I wanted to use Salvation Army music, as well as catching a balance with some of that other material. We didn't have a lot of rehearsal time, so it had to be material that would be digested fairly quick. The good thing is that it was a good group that could do that. And I felt maybe that I'd got my foot under the table with that group before I ended up having to move on. Certainly repertoire choice and keeping it fresh was important for that group. I was just at the point of my kind of second batch of repertoire with the Southern Territorial Songsters before I moved on. And that was exciting to be able to kind of, keep some of them, but also look to move on. If I think about the divisional ensembles, the divisional choirs, generally they were youth groups. And so then I'm looking at music, which is maybe more of a gospel nature, something that's going to have a hook, that's going to engage with them, or a song that I can really sell, that's going to get that full participation level from them. And again, I was very fortunate, and in that there was a culture of we're going to sing. Certainly that Florida group were really enthusiastic, and probably too much so. It could have been refined a little bit more, but I loved that raw energy and that kind of power that would come from that group, and that was one of the real blessings that I've had in my life to be able to work with them. And then you get to a core group where, again, repertoire led, you need things that you're able to learn fairly quickly. I generally would think it would take me probably 5 to 6 weeks to have a song ready. Some of them, if it's a worship song that maybe they would already know, if it was a traditional one that they've sang in other groups, you can speed that up. But yeah, it was a case of making sure that the repertoire was ready. It's always scary when you get up on Sunday and you think this isn't quite there. Also, are we in good communication with our pastors? Are we trying to link it into a sermon plan that's going on? These are topics that we can chat about later on from our day-to-day singing, but that you have to have material ready then that's going to complement a sermon series if that's the case, and you can't do that overnight. You have to be able to plan and prepare. So there, and obviously as you're working with a core brigade, you have different handicaps. Maybe we have to take really good care of our accompanists, and you're not always blessed with a Robert Snelson or a Nick Simmons Smith at the piano, or a Philip Byrne or a Richard Phillips. You have to take what you get, and we have to take care of them and love them, but also play to their strengths. So in those different groups, there was nothing that really I couldn't do within those first two, divisional and territorial. But there was times when maybe I did trip up on a Sunday because I pushed our accompanist too much, and it kind of rolls through, and you hit that banana skin. So again being sensible with repertoire, but that was key. I would often have a similar approach to all three groups with how I would deal with them, in that everyone needs to be fully participating. Everyone needs to be pulling in the same direction. I want everybody in that choir to have a good understanding of the repertoire and the song that we're singing and why we're singing and what it means to them, so that there's a clarity in message. And I often would talk about that as we sing, we're not just singing for the fun of it. We're singing because we have a message that we really want to share. It's not the congregation isn't participating with us. This isn't congregational singing. We're sharing a fresh message that the congregation might have heard before, or again, the real blessing of sharing a song that they've never heard before for the very first time. That's a massive responsibility in that. So whichever of those groups I was working with, that would be the drive.
Yeah, I was thinking, what groups do you out of those groups, which one is the more challenging to work with, and which one do you enjoy more? But that might be a sensitive
Different.
question.
I mean, honestly, Matt, it was really intimidating, and I was really pleased that in Florida we had done the Labor Day weekend. So that's sort of Friday night, Saturday, Sunday, Monday morning, all with the divisional band, because that's a lot of programming to do. So I was so pleased that I'd done that with the band, so that I went in with the choir. I've had experienced that with the Southern Territorial Songsters, because again, you're not meeting regularly. You get this kind of burst of a weekend, and again, if you're not sensible with that, you're going to burn out, or you're going to mismanage your time, or and yet that can be the frustrations of people rolling in because they've been late from work on a Wednesday night, and you're not seeing, you're missing your two key sopranos, and you've only got your duff tenors, so you kind of have to get on with that. So yes, there's definitely sort of levels of frustration that would go on.
Yeah, I think they each have their challenges. I mean, with the young people, you have to have the energy ready to go, but then with the adults, I mean, sometimes there's one or two other leaders in your group that could also be doing your job, and so you feel like you need to be as prepared as you can to take advantage of their time that they're with you there. Okay, let's break it up for just a bit. I know you had a couple resources. I don't know which one would be better to share right now, but just to kind of share some things that you think are useful to us as we get into the practical side of things.
So we, as a territory, had decided probably 2 years, 18 months ago, that we wanted to look at leadership growth within the territory. And now, again, I come to this with my USA South hat on, where I found that we were very progressive with that. The TMI leadership schools, and again, I must say that that was an opportunity for me to cut my teeth with Sally Broughton and actually do some leadership and then get that one-on-one critique instantly. And that's a fantastic opportunity, whether that be through the band or through the choir or through the worship track. And I know that not all the territorial schools are doing that, but that was formative as well for me. But that idea that we would be open to having a look, as I travel around what really for me is a very traditional area, I see a lot of older folks in leadership, and it makes me think, can you teach maybe as a new dog, an old dog, a new trick? Because I think there's times where people have been in that role for so long. I'll give you the example of my grandfather. My dad's dad was bandmaster at Bedlington for 40 years. That's an awful long time. And it made me think, would I be stagnating in that time? I think it's really important that we have somebody who can challenge us, or have some material that would maybe challenge us, that would push us out of the box. So we started working on some material called Join the Crescendo, is what we called it, and that came from the Psalms, and that idea that we would all be together and joining the crescendo together. And first of all, we looked at spiritual leadership and what that meant, and the fact that we would be a spiritual leader first, and that this material then, that guide A, could be used with anything. It could be used with band, choir, worship team, the knitting club, if you wanted to, because we have some of those over here. That this would just be an idea that if you're in a leadership position, here are some guidance. This is some guidance. So the idea now is that when you're commissioned as a sing company leader, you're dropped in the deep end, that your regional music and creative arts person would come alongside you. You would have kind of this manual for being a spiritual leader, what does it mean, and B, a practical side that would go along with that. So if I had a new songster leader, I would be able to give them guide A, which would cover the spiritual leadership 5 truths, maybe, as well as a practical guide B, which is maybe what would be useful. And again, not all of it, but some of it we've already talked about even, but that we would be able to have something to put in hand as well as partner with them. Because yes, there's new leaders who need some help, but also I think there's some of our established leaders that could do with maybe just that challenge of, are we doing all that we need to do? And I know that even for me, as I've been leading, that's been something that has been important to me. So we needed to provide that opportunity. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So are those things available online, or do you have to reach out to a UK representative, or how do you get some of that material?
Right now, it would be essentially of the UK territory. This is a classic. We were supposed to unveil this fully in May at the Symphony Sounds weekend, but thanks to COVID, all of that was shut down, and it's kind of given us maybe a little bit more chance, not now, but prior to furlough, to put some of that together and polish a little bit. But that idea that would be a brass tuition, that would be a brass leadership, that would be a worship band leader, that's a core pianist track, guide B, that would work for them, as well as vocal leadership. I thought it was an exciting way to go, and there's lots of material out there, but it was just something that within our group we felt the UK territory were in need of.
Okay. Yeah, we'll have to steal a lot of that stuff from you. It sounds like it'd be some good resources for sure.
Definitely, I'd be happy to share.
Okay, so let's get back to the core for a second, which I imagine most people listening are, that would be their main interest is leading at the core. And, unfortunately, I don't know, how many corps in each division actually have, working songster brigades. I think in Texas there's probably 5 or 6. It's not a large amount, but let's talk about some of the practical things you do for that, and then maybe also about what are some of our ideas for expanding that and getting more people involved and more core involved in that. But first of all, you mentioned this earlier about, you had your first kind of group of repertoire. You'd moved through the territorial songsters and you were getting into your second round. And I think, I've kind of learned from you and Daniel, who I sat under in Georgia, kind of the process for that. And so now, this will be about the time. Maybe I need to start looking at it, although our core isn't back yet. But this will be the time where I'm picking my 20, 25 pieces that I want to look at for the year with my songster group, and put a few things in there that we did last year just to have something we can hit quick right away, and then a few standards, and then some stuff that's going to push us. So what's your process for selecting repertoire?
So I grew up on a call, and again, we still do this. You arrive to your rehearsal, and the individual musical salvationists or Sing to the Lords are on your chair, and you've got. I mean, so yes, we've definitely covered copyright. We bought all of these. We have sort of 80 copies of each volume, and that's what's handed out. And I remember eventually thinking, why don't we have a folder that we would work from, which is what you're talking about, Matt. So I've always would have a folder that would generally work within probably 2 years, and then so you've got a year's worth of material that then I'm fading some of them out and adding to. And once I get into that rotation, it was the same thing that I did with the divisional band, because again, you can't. I hated just the fact that we would go back in desperation to something. Sometimes you have to. Sometimes you hit those summer months and you need that go-to. So we're going to sing "For God to Love the World" again, because everybody would be comfortable and we haven't had tons of rehearsal. But I think it's important that, again, whatever other preparation that we're doing, that we're being faithful to providing interesting material to our groups and to our congregation. So that's the other thing to think about here, is that, are we singing, does the choir sing for me, what I like? Do I pick stuff that I know the choir like, or should we be singing stuff for the congregation?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a balance in a way between all of those, probably less of what I would like, apart from those moments where we get to educate, which sometimes we have to do, and say, look, we're going to sing this one. And it might be a slow burn and you can tell that your choir don't love it. But as a reason, maybe you pick that one. But I think sometimes we forget what our congregation need to be hearing. And we have a responsibility for that corporate worship, that we would play a role within that stream, as it were, that we wouldn't just be kind of out of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, a couple things come to mind as you're talking. One is, I find myself, and this probably comes to praise and worship too, but like as I'm probably guilty of picking way too many slow pieces, because the text is always what kind of grabs me in those. But yeah, trying to think about your songsters and trying to have, a variety of things for them, so it's not all, so they can have a few upbeat things that they do. But I find myself drawn toward, especially when I'm trying to match it up with the sermon, is that, the more deeper texts a lot of times are in those slower pieces. Go
Some of
ahead.
that is also how, like, you use your faster ones. Maybe it's so easy to get into the routine of the songs to sing here, and maybe you don't all of a sudden want to break out something that's going to break a mood you've just had the Bible reading, and now we're going to crash and wallop. Are we flexible enough to use the choir as call to worship and move it around and do things which are a little bit different? The other thought that I had as you were talking there is that I've definitely found that we do an excellent, like, slow rock ballad these days, but I could pick 15 of those. It's harder to find the good, quicker ones, which is why then I think we start looking at other repertoire, which is great. I want to continue to sing Salvation Army music and promote that, but also there's times when we have a good reason to sing something that isn't from our repertoire.
The other question I have for you, kind of in regard to repertoire, is, how, and I think this question we always ask, but, how many, I think you mentioned a little bit, how many weeks do you tend to work on a piece? That's one of those things where when I took over as songster leader, I just felt like as a songster member, we just had these 4 or 5 things we'd always come back to, like you said, and and so I've probably gone the opposite direction and maybe do a little too much new, and then we have that Sunday where like the choir's like, we're really gonna go for this week. And I'm like, yep, I said we're doing it, and and then you come back to them Wednesday, yeah, we probably weren't ready, but I'm glad we sang it out, and we'll do better next time. But how many, what's been
It,
your kind of rule of thumb with that?
it's a tightrope that we have to walk, because I think it's easy to get comfortable, and I think the scary thing is when we get comfortable, we get dull, and we don't have a clear message because our congregation doesn't want to hear, oh, we heard that this month already. So yes, we have to challenge our groups as well as ourselves to keep our repertoire fresh. And I can definitely think of, I mean, even week-long camps. I had a wonderful moment in Argentina where I made one gesture that was strange. And first of all, my Spanish isn't anywhere near where it would be good enough. But in they came to the verse, and I just had to kind of like yank the brakes on. And one of those ones where you like literally had to stop the entire song. We've already done a introduction, most of the verse that came in. It was just a proper train wreck. And one of those ones where you never ever want to repeat. So when those moments happen to you, I think hopefully we learn from that and we kind of guard against. The other part of that, which we haven't quite got to, is I love being able to have a choir that would sing without the music. My songster brigades didn't do that an awful lot unless we were maybe really working towards Thanksgiving concert, spring festival, something like that, where we were able to get that comfortable. I think technology helps us a lot these days, in that there's no reason why on our songster Facebook page people couldn't be connecting with our songs in an audio format. I mean, we don't have to send out CDs anymore for them to listen to. Sydney Staff Songsters were a wonderful example to me of them being ready, and every single word was kind of in that memory banks, and therefore their delivery was that much more important because they didn't have that barrier of the book. So I love to be able to sing without the music. There's a pressure that comes to the leader there as well. Although I would love to be in one of those. It felt like the leader of the Sydney Staff Songsters didn't have to do anything with given words. They knew the words, and you could just do. Whilst I always felt the pressure of, we're going to do this without the music. I have to be ready to be able to share that in enough time.
Yeah.
But again, sometimes we have to work our group to that point as well. You have to challenge them. There's a lot of the older members of my choir that would hate to do it without the music, but just because it was uncomfortable. So you have to kind of push them out their comfort zones, and get them to see the benefit of what we're doing. My rule of thumb would usually be maybe between the 5 or 6 weeks. But some of this also works on how we teach a new song. Yeah. It frustrates me to know when to hit a rehearsal where all we do is top to bottom everything, and we move on to the next thing, top to bottom. That's not how I would learn the best. What I would do is learn my mistakes well then. So I would often start at the hook of a song, start the chorus. If I want to learn, for example, the verses are repetitive, first week I would maybe just do melody of the verses, and that would be it. And then you move on. So we build a song with a good foundation. We don't have the pressure for our accompanist even as well, that we're now going to try to sing this straight through. We're not going to learn anything doing that. And also, hopefully, we've done the homework where we've looked at a song and we know here's a pitfall from my choir, which might not be the pitfall for the Southern Territorial songsters that we sang, but I know for my sopranos, this interval is going to be rough. I have to do the homework before we get there to know that I can help them through that. But 5 to 6 weeks generally, I would think, to be comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah, and you mentioned preparation just a little bit. I don't know, and we'll take some questions here in a few minutes because I know we're getting toward that kind of 3/4 length here. But how do you go about your rehearsals? Is there a set kind of format you do with a couple songs, devotions, couple songs, and what are you going after specifically? Obviously the first time, maybe you're going for notes, but how do you kind of transition them from just kind of knowing the rhythms and knowing the notes to finally like making music out of it?
So some of that, and I'll just touch on that quick. I think it's a bit like training a dog, right? It sounds a bit rough, but rough. Get it? Stop it! Stop everybody laughing now. When we're strict and we go after. This is what the phrase is. Hang on a minute, we missed that. We're going to do it again, and we keep a rehearsal going, and we make sure that our entrances are good and our ending of phrases and words are tight, and you don't stand for anything else. That's what I think we kind of teach that straight away. So my hope always has been that because we hold true to that as a standard, that becomes good behavior, that they know that we're going to stay on the vowel sound and do the splash sound together and all those sort of good things because we've trained it. What was that question again?
Yeah, I mean, I think, what does a typical rehearsal look like, and how do you get from, the basics of the music to actually,
Yeah.
making something that's
So
art?
now my structure of my rehearsal now would be I have a set vocal warm up that I would do, which is based. I stole it from the Liberty Voices, so I know came to TMI. Octave is what I call it now, and it's vowel based and it's chord based, and that's what I do to start every single rehearsal. So they're not thinking of we're going to do X, Y, and Z. It's a comfortable warm up. It doesn't push maybe some of our older folks out of their comfort zones who are thinking, why on earth do I have to? I never warmed up singing the songs to Brigade. We just started. And yet we have to educate about why that's important. Then I would look to sing what I was singing on Sunday next, if I'm working on with a course songs to Brigade. So early in the rehearsal, I'm trying to get as much work as I can do on the next thing that we're going to share. So if it's Wednesday, I'm working on the first thing that we're going to do on Sunday. And then the next slot really is to learn new stuff for me. I want to try to start them on newer stuff when their brains are still there and it's fairly fresh. I don't like to spend, and I often would break this rule, but I would try to stay into 20-minute windows, especially if I've got an hour and a half of rehearsal. I want to try to keep that moving. The other thought there is if I'm keeping it moving, there's less chatter and talk because what they're going to be doing is singing or listening to me bark at them to know where they're going to start for the next part of the singing. So the tempo of rehearsal for me is important, and I keep that quick. Now I've been told that can be hard to follow sometimes, so you have to acquiesce here and there. But generally, my personality would lead to I want things moving. Then maybe you're finishing off a song, and then I would always finish with what we're going to do on Sunday as well, just so that that's fresh in their mind before we move on.
Yeah, a couple things from that. I'm with you, but I have to, like you said, people coming in late. I normally wait to put the thing we're doing Sunday until warm up one piece, and that's the third thing, just so I don't miss anybody that came in late. Because man, I got some folks that
Tardiness.
don't show up on time. So yeah, I got to kind of program around them. But yeah, for sure. Okay. What's something as a leader, maybe as a songster leader or just music leader in general, that's a trait or a skill that you need that wasn't necessarily taught in school or isn't necessarily musical? What do you think are some important traits that go beyond the music?
I have to say, this does feel a little bit like a job interview, by the way, just putting that out there. However, it's a good question. And I think what springs to mind for me there is that what atmosphere is in the rehearsal. Okay, you can talk about all the musical aspects of things and all the spiritual aspects of things. Oh, by the way, devotions would be a key part of my section as well. Probably before we return to that last song, just talking about schedule, because I think the devotional aspect is really important. But the atmosphere of rehearsal, the fact that we have to be able to fail in rehearsal and it'd be okay, that people would be really kind of working on the edge of the cliff, We had somebody come and lead our songsters as a guest who talked about taking everything to the extreme so that the louds would be loud, but the pianos would be, goodness me, you're working so hard And if it doesn't work out, that's okay, because it's still practiced. This isn't performance, this is practice, and this is how we're going to learn where those boundaries are going to be. But that ability to be able to fail and for us to be okay, the tricky thing as a leader is to recognize the fail and not crush someone's spirit with it, you know? I like laughter in rehearsal. I want us to be sort of being able to enjoy ourselves, and I want that atmosphere. But also that maybe comes along with, goodness me, that was horrid, and being able to say that and do that with everything still being okay and everyone still being friends and kind of loving each other. But that also comes from your personality, so that's going to be different for every single one of us as we stand in front of a group. There's things that you would say that I wouldn't be able to get away with, but likewise, there's things that I would say that you wouldn't be able to get away with. So we have to know, we have to know our groups, but also we don't talk about that atmosphere in rehearsal very often, or even the option of stopping and saying, goodness me, that was a Holy Spirit moment right there, and being comfortable with that. And you don't maybe pray straight after that warm up, and that's a moment where we would pray together as a group, or you would ask somebody for a testimony, or recognize that the Holy Spirit has just done something pretty cool. Yeah, so that would be my main area there, the atmosphere of how we worship and practice together.
Yeah, and something you said just reminded me of one of my thoughts as well. Of we mentioned we I've been in groups that just, let's run it down, let's say a couple comments, let's run it down again. And so like I've strived to, like you said, like skip around and make sure different parts of the song are addressed each week. But then I have the fault of I never run anything down, so I have to kind of remind myself I need to run something, one or two things down in rehearsal, so people kind of get the feel of the piece as a whole and start getting used to that.
But Matt, that would be part of my build in learning a song. So by the time I get into maybe week 4 or 5, we're doing much longer chunks because we've kind of built up to that bit. Yeah, but I agree with you. I'm the same way. I would always kind of be moving around.
Okay, well, I have a couple other questions we can finish up with, but I wanted to just put it out there to our folks that are in on the call. I know it's several DMDs and THQ folks, so I don't. Does anyone have a dying question they've had this whole time that we haven't gotten to, that Stefan just joined us in the last 5 minutes? If you ask what we talked about at the beginning, I can't help you, but but if you have, yeah, go ahead, Stefan. Stefan, sorry.
All right. So Stephen, since you've been away from the USA and you went back to the UK, how many years have you been teaching choir?
So that continued when I got back. Stefan, we spent a wonderful week together in Jamaica, didn't we? I remember it fondly.
Yes.
We painted a school building that I know that they had to repaint the next week, I'm sure. But it was a great week of worship together. So yes, when I got back, probably within 6 months of being back, there was a need for a youth chorus leader, and I was able to step into that. So really, that's the only leadership that I do apart from my kind of regional responsibilities. I'm a faithful member as much as I can be of songsters and band at the core, but lead the divisional youth chorus, and that's kind of been my leadership fixed since I've been back. But I miss all the sort of opportunities being a DMD gives you. Good to see you, Steph.
Yeah. We have another question just about conducting. How much would you say you're just kind of keeping the tempo? What do you do with phrases? What do you do with your hands? And is that, I guess, different being a choir leader than it is being a band leader? What are some of the things you go for in choir?
Definitely. And I would maybe call it conducting the line more. You can be maybe a little bit more flexible on what you're doing. There's times when it definitely helps your choir just to really kind of give them that tempo. But often I would be more expressive with my movements. Leading a choir through a line, I think for me was always very helpful, and did that brilliantly. So often I can be conducting rhythm rather than beating through. And if that comes with personality as well, one of my failings maybe is that I want to sing all the time. I love to sing with my choirs, whether that be the soprano line or whatever. I remember somebody telling me, and I've kind of stuck to this, when I would demonstrate at pitch. So I'll sing the soprano line in my Bee Gees falsetto, same thing with the altos, and move through. I'm obviously a weaker bass. And I think that's probably helpful. But I would always want to be giving kind of the mouth shape, but it's tough for me not to just have a good old belt as when I'm really quiet. And there's times when I think, you know, those weeks when maybe the piece was a week too soon that we put it on, that maybe it's me singing it through, go through. But I wouldn't want to do that. We should be relying on our choirs to sing. But definitely conducting wise, I'm conducting line more than I am just beating tempo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm definitely a singer, and sometimes in my choirs it's to help the tenors, as well. And I think like us going back to that one semester of vocal technique I took. Yeah, I mean one of the things they talk about is, as a choir conductor, I mean there are certain things you can do that make people tense up as well, and so we just have to be mindful that what we're doing is not super angular or jolting at them or anything like that to kind of make them tense up as well.
Yeah.
Any other questions from those of you that have been following along with us today? Yes, sir.
Stephen, I have a great question for you. It's good to see you, by the way.
Hello, Daniel, nice to see you, friend.
As we deal with our core brigades, it's all volunteer group. So, we could have a mix of people that are great singers, and then we get the mix of those that just want to be in that fellowship. How do you balance that sensitivity of, trying to keep that musicality up high, but encourage those that struggle with the singing and learning of the music quick?
Yeah, I've definitely been inclusive, Daniel, and I've been intentional on that throughout my ministry. And it should be an open door for those people to engage with. The fellowship has meant so much to me. I wouldn't want to deny that to somebody else. And there's times when even a core has felt down, but because the kind of little club of the sections has kept going, you have that energy. And yes, I want that to be an open door. I think there's tools that we can do to help folks. I'm conscious more and more these days that people aren't reading. So yes, we're teaching by rote, but we also have a responsibility, I think, even in that short window of time that we have. And I would hope that the experienced singers within our groups would have patience, where we should be able to do a burst of theory here, a roadmap lesson there, because it's not fair for any of our group to kind of not be able to keep up. And I think maybe strategically we can use our stronger singers then. It probably helps with blend with our choir anyway. But I would always look to kind of even sandwich maybe as one of my stronger singers with two folks who could look to learn from that person, and also have them be proactive with that, where they're going to be able to help out, because we should be inclusive. And certainly as a songster brigade on a weekly basis, we want people to be able to join that fellowship and also feel like that's okay. And also maybe it's okay to explain to them, yes, there's going to be a learning curve here for you, and they have to be up for that challenge. Because also we can't dumb things down to the point where we don't have that direction and drive. But I think if we can pull in some of those key members of the choir, they'll give us a hand with that. You knew that as well, but I'm just confirming.
Yeah, I was kind of keenly aware that I think last year I had a brand new person show up to songs rehearsal, like a non-army or someone that didn't grow up in the army, which I think we would all want. But I was just keenly aware of in those rehearsals of like, man, I really have to slow down for them, but I don't want to go too slow for the other people, because probably 60% of the repertoire we're using, I expect that the choir's already sung before in the past 6 years or so, and so I'm moving quickly for them, but then I have to really imagine someone seeing this for the first time, and how do I make sure I don't completely lose them? Um, Stephen, that leads me to one other question I had, and then I can just open it back up for one more. But I know that the UK has been doing a lot of community stuff, and a lot of different programs trying to bridge the gap as the cores are shrinking. Um, Tell us, is there anything been happening in regard to choir and community efforts? I saw some stuff with some special needs groups you guys do, homeless shelter choir things as well. Can you just talk on any of those programs and how we might try to do some of that stuff here?
Definitely. There's an idea of, and again, we all know the benefits of singing and how it brings people together. I'll talk to you a little bit about our homelessness service choir, which was initiated in my region. I went to Sunderland, and they were doing like a talent show night, which is what it was going to be, Matt. And it was going to be a lot of lip syncing. And we sort of said, I think we can maybe do a little bit more with this. There's 15 of you who are meeting to work on this. Why not? And we did the finale of Les Mis as a choir, and it was sang in unison, but there was an idea that we were going to do this together as a performance, and that grew to the fact where those combined choirs from Scotland and Sunderland performed at the Royal Albert Hall, and that's an amazing opportunity for me. Never mind the folks who are in the choir. The community choir initiative started very early. We tried to earmark pieces of music within our repertoire, as well as other things that we could sing that would be available, and provide a pack that would go with that. Lots of core now, maybe it's had a songster brigade that had kind of fizzled out, have initiated a community choir that would sing on a maybe more informal basis. They would maybe either sing once a month or every couple of weeks. And that would be, again, no massive responsibility for those members to be affiliated with the corps. But again, we're getting some footfall through the corps because of that involvement. So the community choir has definitely grown throughout the UK. There's a guy, Gareth Malone, who would be on the BBC doing a choir program, and that helped raise the profile of singing. There's a new program that we've been working on, again within the homelessness services, that would just use secular songs to maybe have a further discussion on where they are in their life, hopefully then leading to a faith conversation. So just that idea that singing is powerful and singing brings people together. One of the big benefits of that, whether it be the ARC or is the staff mingling with the residents on a level playing field, that they kind of came together where they didn't know anything and they didn't know anything, and that wasn't kind of like an us and them. They were in the same boat, and the choir did that. So yes, lots of community choirs popping up here and there, and of becoming established affiliated corps groups kind of under the umbrella of a corps. There's still the discussion here about open sections and what that means, and kind of my thoughts on that are, I would never want to do that out of desperation just to survive. We should be doing that with an intentional ministry, and looking to extend kind of the reach of our choirs. But yes, it's something that's kind of taken off and is working around the country.
Well, I think we've gone beyond our time limit here, but did anyone have another question? I mean, we could talk about this for another 30, 45 minutes here, but anyone have another question that we didn't get to that you wanted to hear answered today from Stephen? Well, I'll just encourage you guys. We've heard some great comments from Stephen, and he might have some other stuff to say. But a lot of us on this call, we grew up in the band tradition, but have found ourselves, leading choirs and actually loving it. I mean, it's in some respects, I feel more moved by songster pieces than band pieces a lot of times, because the words are right there in front of you, and so I just encourage you to to take it up and give it a shot, because like we said, it's not a widely spread thing in our territory anyway, but it's something that is an easy place to get started with music, especially if there's nothing really going on at your core, where you can get folks involved singing unison or singing two-part stuff with accompaniment tracks. And there's so many resources that it just takes one person to kind of have that interest and commitment to do it. But I'd really encourage you, those of you that don't have singing groups at your core, to give it a shot, and to let us know if you have any questions about that. Nick did have one final question for you, Stephen. Your favorite songster piece?
Oh, it's going to end up being a right here, right now. There was a moment, not right here, right now. That's not it. That is a songster piece, though. We sang "Sure on the Shining Night" with the TMI choir. The last year that I led that group, and that song pops up on my shuffle here and there, and is just a moment in time for me that is really special. Matt, that came from a discussion from Elizabeth, where she said, "Have you heard this?" I hadn't heard any of that. I had to be open to listen to new repertoire choices. But that week, and the way the choir came together, some other stories that were fed back to me about how that song spoke to people, kind of is the moment that stands out as my choral piece.
Well, thank you, Stephen, for joining us today, all the way from England. What is it, like 2 in the morning there? I'm not sure, but hopefully you're still
9:04. The night is young.
you're still hanging in there. We do have some more stuff for you today. So tonight at 7 Eastern is our solo recital with a lot of student participants. So that'll be really great. And then tomorrow, another jam-packed day of guests with Jeff Barrington talking about the cornet at 11. John Lamb at 1 doing band leadership, and the leader of the International Staff Songsters, Dorothy Nanskivell, at 3 o'clock with another choral session. So thank you guys for joining us today, and why don't we just have a word of prayer, and we'll close it out here. God, we thank you for this time, just to hear more from a great leader and a man that you've gifted. We pray that we've all been inspired to do things differently, and to use our gifts for you, and to sing together and bring people alongside us to bring you glory with that gift. So just let this week be an encouragement to all of us as we're in this difficult time, and give us ideas for how to come out of this even stronger with new ideas to build your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.